You were not born with beliefs. They were given to you wrapped in tradition, sealed with repetition, and disguised as truth. Before you ever learned to speak, the factory had already begun its work. It didn't have smoke or machinery, yet it shaped you more than any physical tool ever could. Its assembly line wasn't made of metal, but of ideas mass-produced, standardized, and fed into every human mind like products rolling off a belt. From the moment you opened your eyes, you were enrolled in this invisible institution, the factory of thought. It whispered to you through lullabies, textbooks, news anchors, and even casual conversations. It taught you how to see the world, what to desire, and whom to obey. And the most brilliant part? It convinced you that those thoughts were your own. But pause for a moment. What if they never were? What if every belief you hold about success, morality, identity, or happiness isn't really yours, but a reflection of invisible architects who shaped your perception long before you began questioning it? What if free thought, as we glorify it, is just a beautifully packaged illusion? You might say, no, I think for myself. But do you? When you defend an opinion, whose voice echoes inside your head yours, or the echoes of 1,000 others who spoke it before you? Because the factory doesn't just shape thoughts, it shapes thinkers. It creates predictable patterns of reasoning, emotional triggers that guarantee conformity, and subtle fears that punish deviation. It doesn't need chains or cages. It needs only one thing: your belief that you're free. And that's the paradox. The more certain you are that you're thinking independently, the deeper you may be trapped in a web of inherited mental programming. Society celebrates the illusion of diversity in thought, countless opinions, endless debates, infinite perspectives. Yet beneath the noise, everything sounds strangely similar. The same definitions of success, the same fear of failure, the same hunger for validation. You scroll through millions of unique individuals, yet each one seems to chase the same dreams, speak the same language of approval, and hide the same insecurity: to belong. But belonging comes with a price: the quiet death of independent thought. Because the factory cannot tolerate true individuality. It thrives on predictability. It needs citizens who behave, consumers who buy, and minds that never question why. It rewards obedience with comfort and punishes doubt with isolation. And somewhere in that process, the human spirit, once wild, curious, and infinite, becomes domesticated. So ask yourself, when was the last time you had a thought that was truly yours, a thought not influenced by algorithms, culture, or expectation? When was the last time you questioned the foundation of what you believe instead of just defending it? Maybe the real danger isn't that we're being controlled, but that we've learned to love our control. Maybe the factory doesn't need to silence you, because it has already made you silent inside. And that is where the story begins. Not with rebellion, but with the haunting realization that the cage has no walls, only ideas. The factory of thought is not built in one place, it is built within us. And the most terrifying truth is this: you are both its product and its worker. Every generation inherits its version of the machine. Parents, teachers, media, and systems don't consciously conspire to enslave minds. They simply repeat what was once repeated to them. It's a lineage of unconscious programming. Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious, a psychic inheritance of ideas, fears, and myths pass down like genetic memory. You were born into a river of thought already flowing, and before you could swim, you were taught to follow the current. But here lies the root of the problem. The mind mistakes familiarity for truth. When an idea is repeated enough times, your brain stops questioning it. Neuroscientists call this the illusion of truth effect. Every time you hear a statement, your mind conserves energy by assigning it more credibility. Familiarity becomes faith. Repetition becomes conviction. And in this way, the factory keeps running powered not by force, but by neurological efficiency. The brain's goal is survival, not truth. It wants stability, not revolution. Thinking differently threatens both. Nietzsche warned of this when he said that convictions are greater enemies of truth than lies. Because a lie can be disproven, but a conviction becomes identity. Once an idea fuses with who you think you are, questioning it feels like self-destruction. This is why so many people cling to beliefs long after reason has abandoned them. They defend the factory because they've mistaken it for home. Every society, regardless of its era, constructs its factory differently, yet the structure remains the same. Ancient empires used mythology. Modern ones use ideology. The ancients used temples and kings. The moderns use media and culture. But the function never changes: to manufacture consent and shape perception. Aldous Huxley, in Brave New World, foresaw a world where people would not need to be controlled by tyranny. They would be controlled by pleasure. A really efficient totalitarian state, he wrote, would make men love their servitude. And here we are. Our factory doesn't burn books. It buries them under entertainment. It doesn't imprison dissidents. It distracts them until rebellion feels pointless. We are not forced to conform. We are seduced into it. The mechanism is psychological. The factory exploits three core human drives: the need for safety, belonging, and meaning. Safety. The mind fears uncertainty. A belief gives comfort, a cognitive anchor in a chaotic world. Doubt feels dangerous, so we cling to the familiar. Belonging. We fear rejection more than we fear ignorance. To think differently risks social exile. That fear of isolation becomes the guard at the gate of your consciousness. Meaning humans cannot survive without a sense of purpose. So when society hands you ready-made ideologies, you accept them gratefully. It's easier to borrow meaning than to build your own. Each of these drives becomes a cog in the factory, turning endlessly, ensuring that the system sustains itself without external force. You obey, not because someone commands you, but because disobedience feels unbearable. Philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre saw this trap long ago. He called it bad faith when a person lies to themselves to avoid the anxiety of freedom. True freedom, Sartre said, is terrifying because it means accepting that you alone are responsible for your beliefs. There is no authority to hide behind, no ideology to blame, no script to follow. And so most people, consciously or not, choose comfort over authenticity. Viktor Frankl, a man who endured the concentration camps of World War II, observed something similar. When meaning collapses, the human mind becomes desperate to replace it, even if the replacement is false. People would rather live by a comforting illusion than confront the abyss of uncertainty. The factory understands this perfectly. It feeds us meaning, substitutes slogans, trends, moral outrage, and endless identity labels to fill that void. And with every new belief, the machinery hums louder. But beneath the surface of this mechanical comfort lies a hidden corrosion. The more you outsource your beliefs, the weaker your sense of self becomes. When your opinions are built from algorithms, your emotions from advertisements, and your morality from majority approval, what remains truly yours? The modern self has become a mosaic of borrowed pieces. And the tragedy is not that we're programmed, it's that we no longer notice the programming. The factory doesn't just teach what to think, it teaches how much to feel, when to speak, and whom to trust. It calibrates your emotional responses so perfectly that rebellion feels irrational. You obey, not out of fear, but out of self-preservation. You silence your doubts because the system rewards silence with peace. And thus, the human being, the creature once capable of imagination, rebellion, and divine awareness, becomes a predictable machine, operating within invisible limits. But those limits were never real. They were taught. And if they were taught, they can be unlearned. The most dangerous prisons are not made of bars. They're made of beliefs. And the most obedient slaves are not those who are chained, but those who are convinced they're free. You see, once the factory of thought completes its programming, its victims no longer need surveillance. They become self-policing. Every thought that deviates from the collective blueprint triggers guilt, fear, or ridicule. The system no longer needs to punish rebellion. Your own mind does it for them. This is the silent victory of control, when external authority becomes internal conscience. You live in an age of infinite voices, but rarely hear your own. Your opinions, values, and emotions are filtered through invisible algorithms, tailored not to enlighten you, but to keep you engaged. Every scroll, every click, every trend, a conveyor belt of carefully measured dopamine hits. The machine doesn't just sell products, it sells worldviews. It teaches you what to love, what to fear, and who to hate. And you believing you're making choices are simply moving through pre-designed mental corridors. The modern individual no longer consumes ideas. The ideas consume them. The result? A society full of people who are emotionally exhausted, spiritually starved, and yet unable to explain why. They mistake stimulation for fulfillment, connection for validation, and popularity for truth. They are surrounded by information, yet starved for meaning. Their minds overflow, but their souls remain empty. You see it every day, people arguing online, defending ideologies they barely understand, fighting wars of identity while losing the war within. The more they assert their individuality, the more predictable they become. Because the factory doesn't suppress diversity, it mass produces it. It knows that the illusion of choice keeps the machinery alive. As long as everyone is arguing over which flavor of illusion tastes best, no one questions the recipe itself. The psychological consequences of this are profound. When your beliefs are manufactured, your emotions become programmable. The system doesn't need to control your thoughts directly. It only needs to control what you feel. Because emotion drives attention, and attention drives obedience. Cognitive scientists call this the affective conditioning loop. When a thought aligns with your tribe, it releases serotonin comfort. When it contradicts it, cortisol discomfort. And just like that, your nervous system becomes an instrument of conformity. Your mind becomes addicted to the pleasure of agreement and allergic to the pain of doubt. You begin to avoid intellectual discomfort the way you'd avoid physical pain. You stop asking hard questions, not because you lack intelligence, but because your biology has been rewired to avoid the suffering that truth demands. Arthur Schopenhauer once said that the discovery of truth is prevented more by prejudice than by ignorance. But now, prejudice isn't taught, it's engineered. Every app, every ad, every piece of media refines your biases until your worldview fits perfectly inside a self-reinforcing bubble. You no longer live in the world. You live inside your beliefs about it. The societal effects are even more haunting. When billions of minds operate from borrowed convictions, the world becomes predictable, and predictability is the death of progress. Innovation fades. Art becomes imitation. Morality becomes performance. People stop creating from truth and start producing for applause. Even rebellion becomes commercialized. The system sells you your own resistance t-shirts that say, "Be different." Influencers who preach authenticity, sponsored by corporations. Slogans that tell you to think for yourself in the exact same font everyone else is wearing. It's not a conspiracy. It's efficiency. The factory doesn't crush the spirit by force. It seduces it with comfort. You don't even realize that your deepest fears and desires are market-tested commodities. Freedom itself has become a product, packaged, branded, and sold back to you through lifestyle choices. You've been given the illusion of control, the freedom to choose between labels, opinions, aesthetics. But real freedom isn't the ability to choose between illusions. It's the courage to see through them. And that's what society fears the most: awareness. Because awareness is contagious. One awakened mind can dismantle years of programming in others. One person who sees clearly becomes unpredictable, and unpredictability is poison to control. This is why genuine thinkers often live in isolation, misunderstood or mocked. They threaten the machine not with violence, but with vision. They remind others of something the system cannot tolerate, that truth exists outside the assembly line. But awareness comes at a cost. Once you begin to see the invisible patterns shaping human thought, you can never unsee them. Conversations feel shallow. Entertainment feels manipulative. Politics feels theatrical. Even your own emotions begin to look suspicious, as if they're wearing someone else's fingerprints. And yet, this disillusionment, painful as it is the first taste of freedom. Because disillusionment isn't the destruction of truth. It's the destruction of lies. When the illusion collapses, the self begins to rebuild. But this rebirth doesn't happen through knowledge. It happens through unlearning. You must dismantle the inner factory, piece by piece, belief by belief, until what remains is not silence, but clarity. And that's where the next chapter begins the rebellion. Not against governments or institutions, but against the unseen machinery within your own mind. Because the only way to reclaim freedom is to confront the truth that enslaved you. That the prison was never built around you. It was built through you. The first act of rebellion is silence. Not the silence of fear, but the silence that listens beneath the noise. You see, the factory thrives on distraction. It needs your constant reaction, every like, every outrage, every scroll, because stillness threatens it. In stillness, you begin to notice, and noticing is the seed of awakening. When you pause long enough to observe your thoughts instead of becoming them, you realize something extraordinary. not every voice in your head belongs to you. Some belong to your parents' expectations, others to your culture's conditioning, and many to the invisible algorithms that shape what you see. But beneath that storm of borrowed noise, there exists a quiet, ancient voice, the one you lost when you started seeking approval. The rebellion begins when you start hearing that voice again. Carl Jung believed that the process of becoming whole, what he called individuation, begins when a person confronts the unconscious forces directing their life. Most people never reach that stage because it requires looking inward without filters or excuses. It means asking questions most are too afraid to ask. Why do I believe what I believe? Who benefits from my obedience? What part of me have I silenced to fit in? These are not comfortable questions. They strip away illusions layer by layer until only the truth remains raw, unpolished, but undeniably yours. And that truth will not come from another ideology or movement. It won't come from gurus, influencers, or philosophers. True rebellion is not about replacing one belief system with another. It's about realizing that all systems are scaffolds, not destinations. The moment you stop needing external validation to feel real, the factory loses its power over you. But how does one actually break free? Philosophy alone won't save you. Awareness must become action. 1. Detach from the conveyor belt of thought. Every day, the factory feeds you mental junk food, opinions disguised as facts, emotions engineered for reaction. Your first act of defiance is selective fasting. Limit what enters your mind. Don't consume news designed to divide you or entertainment meant to numb you. Information is not freedom if it only fills you with noise. Freedom begins when you choose what not to think about. Detach, observe, and question. Every time you pause before reacting, the machine loses momentum. 2. Relearn the art of solitude. Solitude is dangerous, not because it isolates you, but because it reintroduces you to yourself. In solitude, you begin to differentiate between your authentic voice and the voices imposed upon you. You rediscover forgotten desires, quiet instincts, and subtle intuitions buried beneath the constant noise. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe." He warned that whoever dares to be themselves will often be lonely, but that loneliness is a sign of strength, not weakness. When you sit alone with your thoughts, without distraction or validation, you begin to unlearn the reflex of conformity. You stop performing for others and start existing for yourself. 3. Embrace the pain of awareness. Freedom is not euphoric at first, it's excruciating. When you unplug from the factory, you lose the comfort of certainty. You feel disoriented, alien, and detached. This is not failure. This is detox. For years, you've been conditioned to equate belonging with safety. So when you step outside the narrative, your body panics. But remember, pain is not the enemy. Pain is the process. Every meaningful transformation begins with discomfort. Arthur Schopenhauer said that truth passes through 3 stages. First, it's ridiculed. Second, it's violently opposed. Third, it's accepted as self-evident. Your mind goes through the same evolution. It will resist its own freedom before it can embody it. So endure. Don't retreat to comfort. Every moment of discomfort is a fracture in the illusion. 4. Reclaim meaning from within. The factory thrives by outsourcing meaning offering ready-made identities, careers and lifestyles. But true meaning cannot be given. It must be created. Viktor Frankl, who survived the unimaginable horrors of the Holocaust, discovered that even in absolute suffering, man can choose his attitude. He wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances." That is the essence of rebellion, the refusal to let external forces define your inner state. Meaning is not found in what you consume or achieve, but in the depth of your awareness and the intention behind your choices. Every small act of conscious living, every time you respond instead of react, create instead of consume, question instead of obey, is a revolution. 5. Act without expectation. True freedom does not seek applause. The moment you act for validation, the factory wins again. It has converted your rebellion into performance. Be kind without needing to be known as kind. Speak truth without needing agreement. Create without needing recognition. When you no longer crave external reward, you move beyond the system's reach. Because the system can only manipulate what it can measure, and your inner peace is unquantifiable. The rebellion, then, is not loud. It's quiet, subtle, invisible. It happens when a person begins to live consciously, to see through every manipulation, and still choose compassion over conformity, truth over convenience. This rebellion doesn't destroy the world, it redeems it, because every awakened mind becomes a mirror for others. Awareness spreads not through revolution, but through resonance. And soon, the factory begins to crack, not because it was attacked, but because people stopped believing in it. When minds awaken, markets shift. When hearts awaken, ideologies collapse. And when one person chooses authenticity over illusion, it creates ripples across generations. That is the true rebellion, not the destruction of systems, but the resurrection of the self. Because freedom is not something you fight for, it's something you remember. At some point in your journey, after the rebellion, there comes a strange stillness. The noise of the world fades, and even the fire of defiance begins to quiet. You stop fighting shadows, stop arguing with illusions, and in that silence, something profound begins to emerge. Not another belief, but an awareness deeper than thought itself. It's then you realize the goal was never to escape the factory. It was to understand that you were never inside it. The mind loves duality, right and wrong, oppressor and oppressed, asleep and awake. But the truth lives beyond those opposites. As long as you see yourself as the one breaking free, you're still defined by the very system you're trying to transcend. Real freedom isn't rebellion against the factory. It's awakening from the illusion that the factory ever truly existed outside of you. Because the moment you see that the walls were built by your own attachment to identity, to your beliefs, fears, and desires, the walls dissolve. Carl Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That is the final revelation that the true factory of thought was never society, media, or authority. It was your own unconscious mind. Society merely provided the blueprint, but you were the builder. You produced your own conditioning every time you obeyed fear instead of curiosity, every time you sought validation instead of truth, every time you let comfort silence your conscience. The moment you see this, not intellectually, but experientially, everything changes. The irony of awakening is that nothing external needs to change. The world remains chaotic, deceptive, and loud, but it no longer has power over you. You walk through noise, but it cannot enter you. You see manipulation, but it no longer provokes you. You witness falsehood, but it no longer controls your sense of peace. This is what Eastern philosophers described as the observer state, when consciousness stops identifying with thought and becomes aware of thought. You are no longer the voice in your head. You are the awareness listening to it. In that realization, all chains dissolve. Because the system cannot control what it cannot define, and pure awareness has no definition. Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But the final stage of liberation reveals something even deeper. When your why is no longer external, not career, not ideology, not even happiness, but the very act of being aware, you become untouchable. You stop needing meaning from the world, because meaning radiates from you. You stop chasing purpose, because presence itself becomes purpose. That's the paradox. The more you detach from identity, the more alive you become. You start to see that every belief, every ideology, every moral framework was just a temporary costume the infinite consciousness wears to experience itself. The tragedy wasn't that we were programmed, it's that we thought the program was all we were. The human being is not a collection of thoughts. You are the awareness in which those thoughts appear and disappear, the silent witness before belief, beyond emotion, untouched by fear. Once you see this, the entire game of control collapses, because you realize that manipulation only works on those who believe they are their thoughts. When someone tries to provoke you, you see it as data. When someone tries to deceive you, you see it as projection. When society tries to label you, you smile because you finally understand that labels only exist for those who still need to be defined. You have remembered your original state, not the conditioned self, not the rebel self, but the eternal witness. And in that remembrance, compassion is born. Because once you awaken, you stop despising the sleepers. You understand that they are not your enemies. They are you, at an earlier stage of consciousness. You stop trying to force others to see, because awareness cannot be imposed. It can only be remembered. You begin to live differently, not from ideology, but from presence, not from reaction, but from understanding, not from fear, but from clarity. Every action becomes sacred. Every conversation becomes an exchange of light. Every silence becomes a mirror of peace. This is the freedom that no system, no ideology, no factory can ever manufacture, the freedom of inner sovereignty. You finally see that the real war was never between people, classes, or nations. It was between awareness and unconsciousness, between being awake and being lost in dreams. And when you choose awareness, you don't just free yourself, you free everyone who encounters you, because awareness is contagious. It's not taught through words, but transmitted through presence. When you walk into a room free from fear, others feel it. When you speak truth without aggression, others listen differently. When you live without needing validation, others begin to question their own dependency. This is how real revolutions happen, not through protest, but through consciousness, not through the destruction of systems, but through the illumination of the mind. And one day, you realize the most profound truth of all. You never needed to escape anything. You only needed to wake up. The factory still exists, but it no longer owns you. You still think, but you are no longer trapped in thinking. You still act, but you are no longer acting from programming. You have become something the system cannot predict a conscious human being. The journey ends where it began, in the mind. But now, it's no longer a factory. It's a temple, a space not for production, but for perception, not for control, but for creation. And in that moment of realization, the final illusion dissolves because you understand that the mind was never the enemy. It was simply asleep. Now, it's awake. And so are you.